But let's start with some scarlet colored glasses.
Yeah, well, we did the tweets of the week, and today was media day for practice, and they're back after having their week off for spring break. And so we have a couple different tweets here. One from Steven Sipple, a good friend of the Redcast that was on last week. The clubhouse leaders in Nebraska's punt return competition this spring are Trey Palmer, Tommy Hill, and Brody Belt. Said Brody's a natural punt returner. He's a natural kickoff returner or kick returner and an off returner. I really like where those three guys are at. Bill Bush said, and Boomer is our special teams coordinator, so he can talk about what an off returner is in a little bit. Hale Varsity had one on punter Brian Buschini talking about kicking outside on Tuesday, and it was really cold and windy today. And Bush talked about how that's a helpful to get them training in those kind of conditions. And then last but not least, Brian Christopherson wrote about a guy who keeps coming up from the QB, from the special teams, and from the wide receivers coach is Brody Belt.
Brody's a football player. Brody's probably the best football player on this team. You know, when overall you talk about football player, I think he's a football player. He's smart. He's got high football IQ. I think he can move. He can play Z. He can play R. He can play running back. He can do a lot of things. He can play special teams. So he brings a lot to the table. And I think we're excited to have Brody on our team. I think the sky's the limit for Brody.
So I guess maybe we'll start with that here. They're back at practice again. From those tweets there, Dave, I'll start with you here and I'll show them again. Anything kind of come off the page for you that's interesting?
Well, apparently it's Brody Belt. I mean, he's coming right off the assembly line, being a real football player. We don't know exactly what that means compared to the rest of the 100 and some guys out there. I hope they're all football players. But Boomer, I mean, maybe you could elaborate on the off returner. I'm guessing maybe that's where we only have like 10 guys on the field and he's off the field. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be far too common with our special teams for a scenario like that.
The last year, that's the off returner.
Yeah, no, what essentially, in a nutshell, the off returner is when you have the two guys backfielding the ball. You've got the one who's primarily going to be the focus to receive the ball if you know which direction the kicker is going to kick it, which also isn't a guarantee for us on special teams. But the off returner is the other guy back there, and his job's to make sure that the kick is fielded cleanly, and then to let the upper guys know where they need to go. And his job's to get there and make that, first initial kind of, lead the way and make that big key block to kind of spring everything out there for the actual guy that fields the ball and catches it. And it's essentially, yeah. So it's a very important part of the game. So especially in the kickoff return to have a good eye, know where the ball is and know where you need to make the block. So
gotcha. So the off returner is your second best kick returner.
Doesn't necessarily have to be even a kick returner. It's just, you're the guy who can block, really, essentially. So, yeah.
Right.
Or at least know where he's supposed to be standing and where everyone's supposed to be anyway, which again hasn't been a guarantee for us. So
did Michigan State have an off punt returner that caught it and returned it against us, or is this
only
work on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you said we're not quite sure always where the other team is going to kick it, but in our defense, we don't always even know where we're going to kick it. So
that's true. Going to change this year, Rob.
Yeah.
And Bush today, had a chance to talk quite a bit about. Just some of his philosophy on it. And look, I mean, I love what he talked about. It was a crappy day here in Lincoln. It was cold, it was rainy, it was windy, and he brought up kind of like how golfers, professional golfers, when it's a crappy day out like that, they get out onto the links so that they can practice in those kinds of conditions. And he said basically the same thing here. We're going to practice. We're going to kick in wind and rain. And he wanted to get that team out there today. And Buschini, again, kicking the ball and hitting the roof. I mean, there seems like we have something different with our punter this year that we haven't had in previous years. And Boomer, you've hit on this a number of times over the last 5 years that special teams kind of is important. So, I'll take that as a net positive, at least through a couple of weeks of spring.
Yeah, at least we seem to be once again saying we're doing the right things. So let's hope it actually translates to something on the field. But yeah, I think we've all known, any of our loyal podcast listeners over, 5 years now, Honky? I think hopefully if they've learned anything, special teams is kind of important here and there. So, special teams, folks. So let's see if it translates to something this year. So,
that reminds me of a story when the Jerry World opened up for the Cowboys, 2008 or so. I was down there at the time, and one of the visiting punters during a preseason game hit the scoreboard And they're like, oh my goodness, this is a disaster. They put the scoreboard too low. This is always going to happen. Blah, blah, blah. Have you heard of a punt getting, knocked down by the scoreboard at Cowboy Stadium since?
No, but I think Alex Henry even hit it during one of the Big 12 title games.
Yeah. I mean,
so
it's quite possible. It's usually by intent.
It's not necessarily a good kick.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I want Buscemi to actually practice like coffin corner kicks, for example, would be more exciting to hear than he's hitting the roof, because that means he's practicing that opposed to kicking the ball really high.
Yeah. And Bush actually referred to net yardage, and what it would take to get really good net yardage is kicking it, not out kicking your coverage. He doesn't necessarily want to see a guy kicking it 60 yards just for the sake of it and having a return with 20 yards open around him. I mean, he'd rather have it be a 45-yard kick with the gunners right on him. So, again, it was hearing a lot more philosophy there from him today than maybe I've heard the last couple of times. And he's, this is a big deal. Special teams is a big deal right now. And I'm buying into it. Okay. The other tweets of the week for the football go outside of just this team outside of Nebraska. But for one, we always talk about in-state recruiting. There's Malachi Coleman, and he has an offer now from the defending national champ. So, I mean, his offer list, if it's got Georgia, it's going to be anyone, right? I mean, anybody can be going after him. I still like our chances. I'm so appreciative and love having Mickey Joseph here, and I think that's going to make a huge difference for us. But that list is only going to grow for him, and so he's an important one for us. And then the other tweets have to deal with NIL. And we talked quite a bit about that last week with Sipple. And the first one was the competition for NIL. And this is from us. The competition for NIL is heating up across the college landscape. Case in point, on Wednesday, Urban Meyer was announced as the newest board member of The Foundation, an organization aimed at helping Ohio State athletes land name, image, and likeness deals. And then Big Game Boomer sent out one saying Tennessee just got a top prospect for $8 million. That's more than the entire coaching staff makes. It won't be long before we have an NIL salary cap in college football. I don't know if that's going to happen. And we've had text discussions amongst our group about that. There's a lot of things that go into it. But what's interesting is just how big of a change, cataclysmic change really has happened in less than a year since it went into effect. And one of the things that Sipple talked about last week, Dave, and I thought this was really interesting, I'm going to play the audio from it, is that he talked about how Trev has even told him that he's kind of prepping for a day where NIL might even get brought in-house. Let's play that right here.
Now, here's the big thing. I've talked to Trev about this stuff at length, Trev Alberts. What's really interesting to me is where this is probably going. I mean, there's pending litigation. You'd have to Google it, but I think where it's probably 3 years away where there will be, it'll be more uniform because the schools will be paying the money. I don't think we're too long from that happening, too far from that happening. I'd say 3 or 4 years. Then it's gonna get really strange. I think it'll be even more strange in some ways because there's a school of thought that it could be just football that's paying players, and the rest of the sports wouldn't. That's one school of thought. But what Trev's gearing up for is he's making a lot of financial decisions within the athletic department right now that are geared toward the eventuality of the school paying the players. So his whole line of thinking is if this comes to pass, which it could, then they better have, I don't know, I almost hate to put a number on, but I'd say in the $40 to $50 million range ready to roll. That's a lot. That's a significant amount of money.
Dave, I know both of our eyes went wide open as he said that. And the eyebrows go up. It's like 40 to 50 million, but also just the fact that look, there's no guarantee. I don't know that that's what's going to happen, but at least they're prepping for that. Can you see that happening in 4 or 5 years, like Sip was saying?
Well, I think Sip really hit the nail on the head there about, it being football only. I mean, in that scenario, football's breaking off from the NCAA, at least from a Power 5, structure standpoint. I mean, I don't know how else you get to that point. And that 45 to 50 million is a huge number. you had a tweet up there that I'm sure you'll get to about Tennessee paying $8 million potentially for their 5-star quarterback. And there's an article, I think, on The Athletic talking about how their foundation, right, their collective is trying to build up a war chest of 25 to 30 million annually to recruit with, right? That's happening already. So I guess that number doesn't sound so outlandish once you start to actually roll it into a university structure. The bigger question or bigger questions is really actually how that all happens, right? Because I mean, it just can't, I don't know how it functions today like that. I mean, it could get there. It feels like it might take a little bit longer than 3 years, but
well, Boomer, we just need some guidance from the NCAA on this, on how to set that up, and everything will work just fine, right?
Well, sure, absolutely, and they've been so proactive and forthcoming with ideas and guidance, to start with this whole thing, which is how we ended up with NIL the way it is.
Hope, really.
Yeah, I think Dave's probably hit it right on the head that, if and when this does happen, kind of the way Sipple suggests, is that it is going to be a scenario where football has separated itself from the rest of the sports, because it's just, you don't see how you could do this with all the other sports. And then, like you said, the Power Fives may just have to do this separately. We talked about it with Sipple. I mean, if you're a UTEP, how do you compete with this? I mean, you're already behind the 8 ball with so much in terms of, recruiting and facilities and coachings and just that arms race in general. How do you even, you're not even on the same field anymore when it comes to, now we're spending, 30 to 40 to $50 million recruiting players. Yeah, it's just, you're playing a different game at this point. I mean, this is, essentially minor league pro ball at that point is what it is. It's totally different. And I think what you might end up seeing is something like, maybe do you start considering the football players employees of the university? That's how something like this could go. Right. And then it opens up its own questions of, employee insurance and all those other things, and unionization. But that's where you could get the limits and the salary caps and so on and so forth in the sport.
You can't get a salary cap today.
Yeah, right now you can't have one, just the nature of it so decentralized. But if you did say, all right, the football team are now employees of the university, we all agree we're going to have this kind of structure, that's where you start seeing some of those things, I think. So
yeah, that was producer Skip's point, I think, in one of those texts, was that, they can't unionize right now. So there's no collective bargaining agreements or anything. They can just go out and NIL, it's completely Wild West right now. But, the thought of football being taken outside of the NCAA, isn't that crazy of a thought right now? Because think about what's happened in the last couple of years with COVID. We've already learned what the NCAA has control and not control over. They don't control the bowls. They don't control scheduling, and they don't control the playoff. So when they came in and shut down March Madness, they did that because the NCAA owns that. When they came in and shut down College World Series because of COVID, they own that. They couldn't do that when it came to football. Football already was outside the NCAA's purview when it came to that. And they just, it was up to each individual conference for how you wanted to schedule or don't schedule your games. So, you start to put some dots together here. I mean, it wouldn't be crazy to think that could happen. Now, again, there's how is a big thing. I don't know how you do that, and that's way above my pay grade, but it was just interesting, I thought, when Sip said that. And it's something to keep an eye on, I think, because these numbers, the $8 million for one guy, the $25 million a year, Dave, that The Athletic wrote about, those numbers aren't going to sound crazy in a couple months. Dave or Sipple last week was telling you that, Nebraska is far ahead in the NIL game. And I think we are, but I don't think it'll take long for other teams to catch up either. And there's going to be money thrown around.
Well, there's 36 collectives amongst 29 schools, I think, is what the number I saw on that article about the Tennessee player there. And the $8 million is spread out actually through his junior year. So it's closer to like, what is that? Like, I can't even do 2.5 a year. Yeah. And plus there was like some kind of like a signing bonus as well, I think, that was included in that, which, my Lord, I mean, this is
he's
high
only
school
the
kid.
Fourth best quarterback in the class.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, what do you think Arch Manning's going to get if this guy just got $8 million, Honk? I mean, Arch Manning will literally have
he'll get his own Papa John's franchise. I mean, this is
he's probably going to start getting paid in like how old is he now?
He'll be a senior in football this year in high school.
Yeah. So is he going to sign a deal now? Like, I mean, where's it? Yeah. I mean, it's like to the point. it's like to the point now where, you know, you're going to see some of these kids a lot like the ones that are showing like commitments in like their sophomore, junior year to colleges, right? Like you're going to start seeing kids in high school walking around and, you know, driving brand new cars.
And so different states have different rules on that high school wise. Texas notoriously, obviously, does not allow their high school players to profit. That's why viewers went to Ohio State. Other states are different. So, I mean, that could be interesting.
Yeah, which is ironic because Texas lets people do everything else. So.
Pretty much. Yeah, we did have a few NIL-related questions while we're here. First one I just kind of threw up there. Jeremy Brandt, any chance we can get a big enough NIL deal to get Cam to come back?
Which Cam?
I mean, yeah, is that Cam Mack? Is that Cam Taylor Britt?
You choose. I don't know. Just whichever
Cam
you
Mack.
like.
That would be a good one, Dave.
Or Cam Jurgens, maybe. That's
Cam Newton. Is he
Cam
employed
Newton
right now?
Yeah. He might have some eligibility left. I don't know.
Well, he never had it to begin with, Boomer.
Yeah, Cam Newton had good NIL deals back in 2009 or whenever it was.
I don't think we can get Cam Jurgens back, as far as I can tell. But hey, you never know.
No, probably not. And then loyal listener Ken asked, will NIL and the portal shift college football back to being a more regional sport in terms of recruiting? And you have a better shot at keeping the 500-mile radius kids in the program?
I don't know. I mean, is the dollar worth more in Nebraska than it is in Alabama? What's the exchange rate right now? I mean, the cost of living's better. I mean, I guess the NIL deals might be better if they're already locally known from a high school perspective, right? You know, I could see Malachi Coleman might be able to draw bigger numbers staying home because he already has name recognition here, where in Alabama, he's, you know, would just be getting into a bigger, you know, fishbowl. I mean, I could see that, but I mean, I think it could be a little bit of both.
I think a better question would be: is this gonna help us recruiting outside of the 500? You know what I mean? To some of those like 4 and 5 stars.
I mean,
you know
to your point,
I Dave, don't agree with me. That throws me off.
No, I mean, I think that's what Sip was getting at last week, and I mean, like this is going to continue to play out. But I mean, and maybe we're ahead of 90% of the programs. Maybe Tennessee's one of them that might be ahead of us because they're trying to have $25 million of,
and they'll still finish third or fourth in their own conference.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Which we are. I shouldn't talk.
Point. I mean, right. But I mean, I think what Sip's getting at there is that I think we are very active on, you know, trying to have something like this collective, being able to fund significant recruiting efforts and player retainment efforts. And, you know, I mean, we might not be too far away from seeing our first, you know, $1 million signee. I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, it's different from, you know, trying to bring a coach in here when it comes to the cost of living. Like Sipple said, that a lot of these guys, the volleyball players that are getting free housing, I mean, cost of living isn't even really a part of this. If you're free is free, right? I mean, if that's what comes with your NIL deal is you get a car or you get a free place to live. I don't know that that's really going to affect someone from inside or outside the 500 miles. But I think your point, Dave, about if you're an insider inside the 500 miles and you have a connection already to the state, that might be able to bring you some more money here than it would somewhere else, just because your local name recognition. All right, Jim Cobb, what NIL will do regionally for Nebraska? Our Big Ten teams nearby, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, who won't have the NIL money to offer that Nebraska will.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be the case right now. Let's see if that holds up. We've talked last week about how Wisconsin seemed to have been unable to put together a package for Caleb Williams to make him a viable candidate there at Wisconsin. I mean, it feels like the storyline would be that the alumni base and the boosters at Iowa and Minnesota aren't as enamored with this idea as maybe folks in Nebraska are. But all it takes is a couple deep pockets at any of those, booster clubs to change that. So we'll see. I mean, I think that could be the case.
Well, I think every team's
not really in the recruiting model for any of those schools anyway. I mean, those schools literally build their programs off a lot of 3 and 4 star recruits, right? That stay for 3-4 years at a time, right? Like,
sure, but I think their point here is that, I mean, opposed to saying we need to go get 5 stars across the country, or even 5 stars locally. I mean, this could be a simple advantage of, let's saying that we are going after the same guy that Wisconsin's going after, or Iowa or Minnesota, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
And we can put together an NIL package for 200,000 for this guy for the next 3 years, and they can't put together anything. Maybe that makes a difference.
Yeah.
That's true. Like maybe we could have gotten what's his name's son, who plays for Iowa now.
No, that wouldn't have happened.
No. But Wisconsin,
joke.
Wisconsin's had some issues getting NIL in place. I think in a place like Iowa, it'll be interesting with a guy like Ferentz as coach, old school guy. Does he embrace it or not? And we've talked a little bit about Iowa in the past, where they haven't had a lot of players leave for the portal, so they haven't had to bring in a lot of players from the portal either. Now, if that starts to change, what if Iowa starts to lose players because, hey, I can go and make NIL somewhere else? Existing players, not just high school recruits, but an existing guy leaves because I can go somewhere else, Nebraska or elsewhere, and make more money. I mean, then now you got to start playing the game. And, how willing is he to embrace that? I don't know.
Yeah, you combine this with the transfer portal and the immediate eligibility, one-time immediate eligibility rule, and you can really, it's a free agent market for players from lower conferences or other teams that you can draw from.